Hi everybody, this is DLB202 and today we're talking about sensory design, and we've got Tobias joining us, who is the director of Seven Senses, and he also works for a company called Urban Play. And most of Tobias's career, which he'll introduce in a moment, has been focusing on how we can design spaces that are equitable and that accommodate the seven senses that humans have, particularly in the play space. So welcome Tobias, thanks so much for joining us today. If you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started and what you do for work every day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Would love to be with all the students right now. I'm a very tactile person, but this is a bit different. But again, fantastic to be here. I guess you hear my accent. I'm from Germany. I'm not an Aussie. And I came 13 years ago for a holiday and never left. My background is landscape architecture. I studied in Hanover in Germany. And I'm really passionate about inclusive design beyond accessibility. I guess I'm lucky. My wife is an occupational therapist, and she always challenged me on the designs that I was doing, going like, Toby, so did you actually consider people with different impairments? So that's how the whole thing about the seven senses started. And I also, as you mentioned, I work for Urban Play. So I'm passionate about play. I'm doing a lot of playgrounds all over Australia. And we did a lot of really successful inclusive beyond accessibility playgrounds within Queensland as well. So yeah, really passionate about sustainability, permaculture, inclusive design, and really working with students and getting you guys involved as well as a little bit as a thought provocation. What are the seven senses? Because a lot of people only think we have five senses. So the two is really a provocation to get you thinking outside the square, to drill deeper into the real issues that we are facing.
That's awesome, Tobias. I know the students are going to love this and they would have loved to meet you in person, but can you tell us a little bit about this photo that I found when I was searching you on the internet today?
Absolutely, I love that. So this is a hugging chair. So this chair is actually used with kids on the autism spectrum or with anxiety issues. So while you sit in there, you actually get a heavy weight over your body and you feel like being hugged without being physically hugged. So straight away, your anxiety levels go down, you feel relaxed, and you see myself there. I was so relaxed. I had to give a presentation for a couple of hundred people after that, and that was the best thing. I was so relaxed, nothing could harm me. So really, really cool. Thanks for finding that. That's so awesome. I didn't even know.
You never know what's on the internet.
On the internet.
All right, well, let's kick into it, Tobias. We've prepared some questions, and we might just start with question one, which is, many designers, like you say, are familiar with the five main senses of sound, smell, taste, touch, and vision, but your business actually focuses on seven senses. And what I'm really keen to know is, what are these additional two senses? Could you explain those to the students and explain why they're so critical to design and why they should be considering this, and not just necessarily in the types of play design, but just in design more broadly?
Absolutely. I have to say, I didn't know about the seven senses myself before 2013, when my wife really challenged me on a lot of these things, like how we actually design space, and I was focusing more on the five senses as well. I guess sensory design is important in general, because this is how we experience all the places. That's how I experience my house. That's how I experience my neighborhood. That's how I experience my city. And I found in the design world, a lot of times we are so focused on the visual. So it's all about the visual. It's all about this landmark that we are creating and how, wow, I won an award because of a photo. But sometimes when you go deeper, the sensory components are not there. So even the five senses that everybody knows are a lot of times not really considered during the design process, I found. And then the other two senses that a lot of people are not aware of and not considered at all is proprioception. That's the sense how your joints and muscles are connected. And that was the good example of this chair that you have shown there in this picture, because this is like this idea of being hugged, and then you feel calmer and more engaged with yourself. So for example, there's a lady called Dr. Temple Grandin. She has severe autism, and she developed a hugging chair for herself that enabled her to talk to other people. So a lot of times people with autism, they're very socially challenged, so they really struggle to communicate. But this hugging chair gave her the opportunity to engage with others and then actually study, and she studied animal psychology. And she found out that cattle is super stressed when you take it from a yard onto a transporter. So she developed a cattle squeeze. So the cattle gets squeezed coming from the yard, and she reduced the stress within the cattle by 90%. It's massive.
Wow.
So again, when we look at that for the public realm, how can we actually design spaces that give you this refuge, this idea of, oh, I feel safe here. So we can do it with trampolines, we can do it with hugging, I call it hugging corners. So we can have foam in like corner areas where you press yourself against and really feel relaxed. I proposed that in 2013 to the Lord Mayor of Brisbane, under the theme of Brisbane, a city of 7 senses, to have hugging corners at every bus stop in Brisbane. So people with anxiety issues can actually go to public transport, feel safe there, go into the bus. There's a line for them with hugging chairs. They don't look like disabled chairs. They're just beautiful, engaging chairs. And that would help people to go from A to B and even go to their services.
Wow, that's a great idea, Tobias. That's awesome.
So I think it's very simple things by understanding that. And I think that's the hard thing for us as designers, as landscape architects. How many hats do we have to wear? So we have to be a good designer. We have to understand kids. We have to understand elderly people. We have to become marketing people. We have to do so many things. But I think we don't need to know it all, but we need to know who to engage. So my big vision was always, and it's still not happening, that all the big landscape architecture firms have internal occupational therapists, psychologists in the offices, working hand in hand, because they understand this so much better than we. But we need to understand that to actually make sure that the spaces include everybody. So then the 7th sense is vestibular. It's actually in your inner ear, and it's all about balance. So again, kids on the spectrum with autism, for example, it's not developed. So they can go on a spinner on a playground and they can spin for an hour and don't get dizzy. You and me go on the spinner and after 20 seconds, we go, I feel a bit dizzy, exactly, I feel not good, I have to get off this hour. And actually that's nearly like this proprioceptive stimulation. It really calms them. And we give them this opportunity to engage with that. So the Department of Education, for example, in Queensland doesn't allow swings or spinning. So they say it's a hazard. And it's not really hazard. Yes, it's risky, but there's so many more benefits. So it's like from a risk-benefit perspective, it should be at every school. And there's a case study we did with the Baden State School. We put a spinner in, and actually the anxiety levels sunk straight away. But also academically, they have an increase of reading and writing by 30%. Because the kids actually have better upper body strength, more core strength. They can listen better, they can write better, they can read better. So there's so many more benefits. So, and then there's a lot of people talking there's more than 7 senses. But as I said, that was really the thought provocation for us, 2 designers, say, hey, just step back once you have done your design and have a coffee and then really look through it. Have I allowed for all of these different senses, and are they integrated within each other? And I think that's another thing that is really important that goes towards the affordances theory. Like we have to make sure that every element has all these senses. It's not about like, well, here's just sound and here's just a bench where I can sit and balance on that. How can we make sure every single element that we put in our design has multiple purposes? So a fence is a visual barrier, but it's also a psychological barrier. It's also a tactical element. So I can actually go with my hands and ruffle through it. So there's so many more affordances to it when we think about it, like what colors do I use? If I do a bench, why couldn't I have foam on the bench? When I sit on it, my bum more or less gets like squeezed in and I feel different comfortable in it. So there's so many things that we can do when we design our spaces that go beyond this visual, right? It's appealing. And yes, we ticked maybe the box of sense of place. So it has a story, we connect with the community, we understand the setting, but then all the other layers are missing.
That's so important, Tobias. I think that's great because one of the things that the students have been learning about in this unit is about affordance theory. And we've been talking a lot about how a park bench doesn't just have to be a park bench. It can be somewhere. We can also discourage people from being there. It might be a park bench that has those dividers on it that stops a homeless person from being able to sleep there. Or if we allow it to be a seat that's sort of a little bit wider and a little bit more comfortable, maybe that affords something different for somebody who is needing somewhere to sleep for the night. And just thinking about that, a seat isn't just a seat and a fence is not just a fence. And there's so much more we can do as landscape architects to enhance space and assist society, which actually leads really nicely into our next question, which is the world has obviously become a very stressful place for many members of our society, particular groups as well. But how important is it that sensory design for assisting in the management of anxiety and well-being and some of those health disorders that you're talking about, like autism?
Well, I think it's important in every part of society. That's a really great lead in there, because it's not just about the school environment or how I am at home. It's actually for the whole public realm. And now, obviously, with all this pandemic and people are being even scared to be outside, but what is then the distance? The more important is that we have this sensory engagement all the way through. And I found the same thing as you just mentioned with this, that the students are working on this affordances theory, which is great. But I think another really amazing guy that I found is David Engwich. So a book the students should read is The Mental Speed Bumps from him. It's fantastic. But also when he talks about placemaking, he talks about like interior design, making your house, homemaking. So again, sometimes you have benches, and to just put cushions on it just has a visual different appeal. It obviously has a tactile difference appeal. So it's like inviting people to your home rather than here's a street design, for example. So I think in regards to anxiety and mental health, it's incredible to look at some of the facts. So there's anxiety levels are massive. Like we have the highest suicide rate in young adults in Australia, young men. So when we look at all these challenges that society is facing without even having health catastrophes like we have right now, it's very important that we make sure that every little bit of our public realm has sensory components to it. And I think it starts with your front garden. So once you open your front door, that's when you are in the public realm. So there's a lot of responsibility on all of us, and not just the landscape architects. Every household can actually do something to change their front. But then how do we actually create better, I call it like human corridors. So as landscape architects, getting a lot of money to design wildlife corridors, that a koala can go from A to B. But we're not actually doing that for us humans. So I go on my front door, and then it's like designed for the street, for the cars, not for the humans. There's no natural shading. There's no spots where I can just sit and relax. I can engage with one of my neighbors. Like there's nothing like that. And then I pass all these houses. They all have 2-meter fences, and they have a garage with an electric thing. You go in, go out, nobody knows what's behind it. So we lost, I guess, we're creating a lot of ghettos, and that actually is increasing anxiety and all that stuff. And we're getting actually less sensory input in our built environment as we're doing it right now. But I think there's a shift, and we see that already. There's so many more people now on the streets, which is fantastic. But we really have to, I really believe the 7 sense approach is such a simple thing to go through. And a lot of times we do it anyway, but then it's still to highlight that, to help also the people that use the space. Oh, wow, I never even considered these things, to stand back and go through it. The other thing,
that idea of those human corridors that's genius. I haven't actually ever heard you talk about that, but yeah, we spend a lot of money, and state government spends a lot of money on these wildlife corridors, but what about the corridors that we need to move through every day? And actually, I know, Tobias, that you've been involved in some interventions into the public realm in the streetscape. I can't remember what the name of it was. There was the street. That's how the 7 senses all started, with the 7 senses street day. So that was 2030. And I did like the Building Trust International. That was an international competition. And they asked people from all over the world to find a space that is shit to make it better. I looked out of my window and I was like, man, my street is shit. So I actually designed with Guy Bailey together a 7 senses street. And then we didn't win the competition, but we had like over 1,000 comments with courier mail within 1 hour. And then some people said, like, if you don't like it here, go back to Germany. But most people said, this is great, we should do that. So then we started a tactical urbanism action. So we actually asked people all over Australia to turn their street for one Saturday into a 7 senses street. So we gave them ideas what to do and all that stuff. And we had over 50 streets in the first year, over 100 streets in the second year. And then we actually didn't want to, because tactical urbanism, I love it. But what I found is so sad, the same was parking day. On one day, the parking lot turns into a green space. Next day, the cars park there again. So what is a long-term change? It's not really happening. Yeah. So in the second year, we actually engage with a more social, ecological model. So really, like, everything is interconnected. So we worked with Palmwoods community. It's a little hippie community at the Sunshine Coast. And we worked with the community to actually change the community heart long-term. So Palmwoods
Instead, it's now a 7 census township. So they do still, when they do on the Saturdays their markets, they still use the 7 census to engage with the community. So it was really taking it to the next level, which is fantastic. But I think there's so many little things you can do on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. All right, let's move on to the third question. We started speaking about this a little bit more. Sometimes designers do think that sensory design is only for children, but what contribution can the integration of sensory design elements into the broader public realm do for our public and open spaces?
Well, again, it goes back to all the spaces are for everyone. We shouldn't segregate, and that's the same. I'm a little bit different playground designer, I guess, to a lot of other playground designers, because I don't believe in this. Well, here's an area for the toddlers, fully fenced, and you are here. Then here's an area for the big older kids, and here's like a skate park, and here's a water park, and over here's a fitness zone. So it all doesn't make sense. So a lot of times when we design, we are very fragmented and we are very much engineering driven. So that's where a lot of times it comes from. So the engineers that are sitting very high within council, a lot of times where they want a very clear procurement line. So they go like, well, the local park has to have A, B, and C, and it needs to be in this footprint, clunk. So how do we break this mold? That's a hard thing. But I think sensory design is not just for kids. And that's what I found actually as well. Like a lot of people think the 7 senses is only for kids. No, it's for everyone. It's for the young, it's for the old. And again, when you look at people with dementia, they're actually losing a lot of their sensory connectiveness. So how do we bring that back? For them, it's so important, but for everybody in between. As I said, like you, me, everybody experience everything we do during the day, during our life, through our senses. So the more we engage with it, the better the public realm becomes for everyone. And I think it's really about these choices. Like we can't always go from one to the other. Like there was this massive push on nature play. I love nature play, but nature play can be very exclusive for kids when they are on the, it's called hyper and hyper responsive. When they are hyper responsive, they can't touch sand or anything. It just freaks them out because it's uncertain. So how do we create spaces? Well, I feel like I'm out here, I'm the man. There's a space for me. Or I feel like, I'm actually overwhelmed. How can I find a space within this environment where I feel comfortable? And that's not just for kids, it's actually for all ages, for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's so important, Tobias. And I've been talking with the students because they're currently working on 1 to 100 design, and they're trying to integrate a lot of natural elements into their design. And they're finding that if they do everything sand and loose gravels, then they can't get a wheelchair across it. And so they're going to have to go back and reconfigure and think about that. And they were saying to me, as designers, it just seems like there's so much that we have to consider. And as I mentioned to them, anybody can make pretty places. That's not who the awards go to. The awards should go to the companies that actually do have these multi-layered approaches to design, where it's actually providing for an affordance for more than one group of society, and everybody can engage with the space and everybody can feel safe there, and that there's no discrimination in those landscapes. It's an incredibly important part of what we do.
Well, and I think there's another thing as well where we need to become really teachers or educators, because a lot of times where we always say good places talk for itself, and they do, but it's still, some people lost their imagination, and sometimes they just need this spark to bring it back. So exactly these layers, like I call them layers of excellence. So we have all these different layers, and I use the book from Deborah Cushing as well, Creating Great Places, with her 6 design theories. So I actually use them for my 6 things, and I have my 7 senses overlays, I have my architectural overlays. So, but the more we can explain to our clients why it's not just we just, I felt like this needs to be a round circle. Why is it round and not, well, because actually people with dementia, you can't have corners because they got lost in there and then they don't know the way. So the figure 8 was a very simple thing there, but the same goes for kids with autism or adults with autism. The color red, they're really disengaged with color red. So we shouldn't have like a big entrance seeing everything in red. Well, we actually exclude so many people by just knowing that this color is actually flagging something for them that they don't feel comfortable with. So there's so many things that we need to understand as designers to make sure it is really for all of them, and that we went all this path, and how we, for one, communicate it, but then how we actually visually show it. And I think that's another gap in our design going practical profession, because we do it, and then I explain that all to the developer, but the developer is not explaining that to the actual community that is using it. And that's where another missing link is. I really would love to do, after every project we have done, to do a 1 month community engagement to actually show them how to use it and what to do and all that stuff. And we do the same now with schools. We actually help them to use the playground, for example, for more than just for playing. It can be used for the curriculum. So it's, again, this multiple affordances for everything we do.
And I think that really helps. I know with my tutors this semester, I've got Owen Cafe from V-Design and Marion Long, who works at Goma Bailey. And at the start of all of our classes, I get them to talk about what's happening in practice. And recently they've been talking about value management and our clients trying to cut out scope of our projects and trying to bring down the cost. And the thing is that if you have a justified reason for why the color red isn't used, or why we haven't used concrete, or why everything isn't square and rectilinear and sharp lines, then you can justify aspects of your project and the client's more inclined to keep them. If you've just come up with a really pretty design and you just think it looks really nice, it's going to be scrapped. You're going to end up with turf and concrete.
Absolutely. And I think that's a key thing as well. Like, we have to have more collaboration between the practice and university to get the evidence, but then also how the evidence relies back to dollars, because that's what they, for example, it's just amazing. Like, we just had some research done by the Comp and Play Institute in Berlin. The US, for example, they spend $50 billion every year on elderly people because they are falling. So fall prevention, again, sensory design helps with fall prevention. We could save billions of dollars. So, and then you suddenly get the ears of the politicians to then listen to that. And suddenly it's like, oh no, actually, rather than taking 50 grand out, we put another 100 grand on because it actually makes us money long time. And I think that's exactly right. We need to have facts and not just, well, it's pretty. And so what does it do? Doesn't matter, but it looks so good, isn't it? Well, nobody really cares about the good look. It's like, needs to have more than that. Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's definitely, it's a problem we definitely face in professional practice. Okay, so our last question is very topical at the moment. With COVID-19 taking over the world this year, do you think the public have a heightened awareness of their senses now, both out of fear of using some of their senses like touch and smell? They're wearing masks, nobody's touching anything, they're sanitizing everything, but also the excitement about exploring the landscape, the built-in natural areas surrounding the areas that we live, and how they're responding probably more to sound and sight and those vestibular senses that you were talking about before.
Absolutely. I think I speak to so many neighbors now that a few of them I've never met in my life that live in this neighborhood and just walk around it. And again, and for myself as well, like, I see so many things that I haven't seen before because you have more time. I think, as we spoke earlier, like, it nearly feels like we're 50 years back in time. So rather than coming back from work, throwing my backpack here, taking the kids to soccer and then to karate and then to piano lessons, actually, nah, we're just at home. Doing mountain biking, we go through the neighborhood. Wow, I've never seen this plant. Oh, it's a weed. Why is it a weed? What can we do with it? So you smell different things, you feel different things. Like, I found now spaces in my neighborhood that I never knew exist, like all these little corridors. So I think that goes for everyone. So we have much more going back to our sense. Like, even like, one of my neighbors said to me, he reckons that our air smells better. I think I can't smell that, but it's nice. It's people even think about that. Like, oh, I think it smells better here because less cars drive through here now and things like that. So I think it's a really good wake-up call for all of us. But I think, again, coming back to us as designers, it's more important than ever to really make sure we have this sensory overlays, the really visuals on that. We back it up by evidence, and then we look as well. Another thing with this human corridors, it's so important right now how we actually redesign our cities. Because for one, we see now people can work from home. I'm now 7 weeks at home. My boss probably hated it at the beginning and was scared that we all water the garden the whole day and don't work. But he sees we're still getting the results. We're actually working hard. I have to say, actually, when I'm here, I'm probably more productive than in the office where the music is on, you have a chat and all this stuff. So here I get things a lot quicker done. Sometimes the creativity is probably not as big and hanging out with people together and workshop stuff. But I think we really now see we don't need all this commuting. We don't need all this infrastructure. And our cities have to change to actually allow more social distancing as well while we are actually crowded. And I think all of that is only possible if we really put a health lens on and really engage with the sensory stuff. And I think that's another push now as well. And I reckon now it really will happen that we collaborate more with health professionals. And again, I think that would be fantastic for QUT as well, to maybe even have some projects together with occupational therapists or the physios that you have on campus as well. So I think there could be really nice collaborations out of that.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a changing world. And as I was saying to you earlier, like instead of me going to the gym and doing yoga like I've always done, I've been going out to the park and doing it. And the sensory experience is completely different. Firstly, it doesn't smell like a gym full of sweaty people, but the tactile of being on the grass and feeling the grass under my toes. And when I'm upside down, I see the trees and the birds in the sky, and I hear the people around me. It's a completely different experience. And if we don't have enough space in the public realm to accommodate people doing all these different activities, then people will just go back to life as we know it, back inside, closed doors, air conditioning on, and the senses become dulled again.
Absolutely. And I think that's another thing as well. There's so much research as well when you do your physical activities in the outdoors, how much more beneficial it is than doing it inside. But again, we have to have the spaces for that, and we need to allow for that as well. So it's this fine graft how to make that happen.
Well, aren't we all lucky designers then? This is our job. This is what we get to work on. And I'm sure the students who graduate out of this current cohort of university are going to have a completely different perspective on design, purely from having experienced this throughout their period that they're actually studying. It will change the face of design, I think, for the foreseeable future. Hopefully, anyway. Hopefully we won't just wake up in 2 months' time and life as we know, and we're all back in our cars and commuting. Hopefully we continue to have that strongest sensory experience. Okay, Tobias, we might call it there. I know the students, if they were here, would give you a big round of applause. They're always extremely grateful. They're forever pulling at my strings saying, hey, Elena, we want to have more engagement with the practitioners and with people out in practice. So thank you so much for making the time. For my students, I'll see you in class on Tuesday. I'm going to stop the recording now, and thanks again to Tobias.
See you guys. Thank you.